Hello everyone. So you guys might remember that one of my awesome patrons let you in on their special video, because if you join the master tier of my or even the next one below that of my Patreon, I will do a special deep dive tutorial for you on any topic that you want that I'm capable of giving you a deep dive tutorial on. So we have that discussion, you pick a topic and I do it. Now the last time the awesome patron who got that an extent was kind enough to let you see it and make it public and put it on the YouTube channel. He said let everybody have a look. And so my latest patron who has joined my master tier very generously is Jared Russell, who's also an awesome supporter of my boy Big Fudge, my co-host on the ForgeCast. And so when I asked him what he wanted to have a deep dive on, he actually had a very interesting idea, and he also said please share this with the rest of the community so that they get to see it. So big thanks to Jared, awesome dude. He is Ironwood, I think, Ironwood something. I always forget. I just know him as Jared. So, yeah, the topic that he wanted was that he has found interesting that I started my metalwork career doing jewelry, and he wanted to know, going from jewelry work to blacksmithing and also mainly bladesmithing, were there any skills or tools or techniques that transferred across that led to me doing things in a way that may not necessarily be sort of normal. And it caught me by surprise actually, because I'm self-taught, so I do things the way I do things, and I've never really considered the why, which is funny for me because I'm always saying you should know the why. But this one caught me by surprise, and so it got me thinking, and it took me a while to actually think about just how much of what I do does come from jewelry work. And so I wanted to share this thanks to Jared's generosity with all of you, and I thought we'd do a little bit of a tour of my workshop, and I would explain the tools that I have and the techniques that I use them for that have seriously helped me as a knife maker or just a blacksmith, and why you may want to consider adding them to your shop if it's a tool, or repertoire if it's a skill. So I've got you on a GoPro on a little head mount, so I'm going to fix you on that and you'll be able to see what I'm seeing. I'll just take a moment to align you correctly and we'll do a bit of a tour of the shop. Okay, so most of the work that I do happens right here. Now you're going to notice this shop is an absolute pigsty, and it's the shop of a busy person. Anybody who does this for their living is going to know what I'm talking about. You don't really have too much time to clean, but a lot of the magic happens at this detail station. So one of the things that I have noticed, because a big part of this analysis of how I do what I do is actually it comes from a perspective of looking at other YouTube smiths and seeing, oh, they're not doing that, or why don't they just do that? I have that thought a lot. I'm sure a lot of people have that thought about me, and it's because I do things a little weirdly. One of the things that I'm very pedantic about, and we've talked about on the ForgeCast before, is lighting. I'm super paranoid about lighting, and it's probably some of the most expensive items in my shop are lights. Even just this little ring light, it's an articulating movable ring light, and it's one of those good articulating ones. It's not just friction, it's based off spring systems, and it actually has a magnifier in there as well, which does a really good job. But this is the sort of thing that a jeweler would use, not so much making knives, but it has been phenomenally helpful because I have it at the same place that I have my rotary tool set up, which if you are not using some sort of rotary tool in your shop, you really need to fix that. And not just any rotary tool, one with speed adjustment. Speed adjustment is key. I probably have more bit varieties than most people. This is about a quarter of my collection. And so much of my work is actually done just standing right here. And it is a standing station rather than a sitting one. I do need to get a tall stool because some sessions here are very long. Like really long. And you know, the old legs get tired a little bit when you're doing particularly long sessions. So yeah, that has helped. And what I have noticed with this setup is that when I see other knife makers on YouTube, they don't have one of these setups until they get to a certain level with their work, and then it becomes almost standard. So I think what it comes down to is the biggest transference of skills from jewelry has come down to levels of precision, because even basic jewelry you need quite a bit of precision. So precision comes in the form of being able to work in very detailed space where a magnifier really helps. But it also comes down to the ability to see things from different perspectives. Hand sanding is a really good example of that. If you're hand sanding, you can look at a hand sanded blade and think, oh, that's perfect, it's done, I've gotten out every single scratch. But if you were to flip your view and look at it from the other side, you would see a dozen scratches that weren't visible from the other direction. So being able to move your light is hyper important, and it's the same in jewelry. Now, one thing that jewelers have, which I haven't seen many knife makers have, is actually a detail optimizer with inbuilt lights. Now, the lights on this are pretty intense, but a lot of people use magnifiers, but you need the light as well so that you can change the position. These lights are particularly bright, given how small they are. But this is actually a watchmaker's optimizer. This is the sort of thing that you would be about that close to the work in order to use. So not always ideal. I need to get one for more when I'm standing further away from things. Look at this mess. Awful. Shameful. So yeah, light and your ability to move and reposition the light are massively important. The next thing is that you'll notice that I've got a lot of vices. I've got one here, I've got another one over here, I've got another one over there, and they all have different purposes, different levels of hardness of the jaw. Now when you're using a vise, you've all heard of soft jaw vices, but what you may not realize is that the softer the jaw, the less firm the grip that you're able to achieve on the work. So I have basically something that will hold stock very well and very sturdily, which is a total steel jaw vise. My next level is this one here, which I've converted into a copper jaw vise. It won't hold work as securely, but it will be less likely to mar any surfaces. And the final one that I have is a rubberized jaw vise, which does not hold work very solidly at all, but it does not mar the surface whatsoever. Another thing that I have is a portable vise, which actually has a little suction base and is adjustable with a ball pivot, and is also adaptable into hard jaw or soft jaw, and it will hold round stock because of those teeth. I also hold it vertically. A very handy thing to have. It's a little bit like a jeweler's vise, and it was my jeweler's vise. I never got one of the really fancy big ball ones because they are very expensive. But different vices are for different purposes. You can't just have one vise and get away with everything without having to make sacrifices in one or more areas. So the next tool that I've only ever seen sort of high-end knife makers use is one of these, called a jeweler's fork. And jeweler's forks are a phenomenally useful tool. They are a consumable tool, and a lot of people don't seem to realize that. The people I've seen using them, they're mangled. I always make mine out of scraps of of wood so that I can just make another one. And basically, while you're filing on a small piece, you can actually get up in there into the crotch of that fork while you're filing, but still have pressure going downwards on small pieces. Really, really good for work on guards and file work. Also good with jeweler's saws. If you're working on a very small piece that you need to saw through, you can actually put it across this fork and have the saw move in, and you can, when you're doing the pull down stroke, it can't go through the gap, but the saw can. But these start getting marred with file scratches and cut marks and things like that. My last one probably got destroyed about a week ago, so this one's fairly fresh and hasn't had much destruction yet. But you want to mount it nice and solidly wherever you're going to use it, and have a nice clear area underneath. So that is definitely a tool that is super handy if you're doing small detail work, which does happen on knives. It's not just a jewelry thing. So another thing that I have is lots of different types of tape. I've got sort of gaff tape, I've got electrical tapes in different colors, I've got 100-mile-an-hour tape, I've got the famous blue tape. Who doesn't love blue tape? Different tapes are used for different things in jewelry, because sometimes they protect a finish if you are giving the like non-ferrous metal a bath in liver of sulfur. This is usually enough to protect the surface. This can also prevent against scuffing, and I use it to protect blades when I am doing sort of work on the handle and I don't want to touch the actual finish of the blade. Blue tape's really good for that. Electrical tape's really good for adding mass to something, because you can wrap it around and around and around, and it binds really tightly because you can stretch it as it winds around things. It gives you more of a purchase to hold on to something that otherwise would be too small to hold on to. Electrical tape's kind of the same, but it's also provides very scratch resistant surface because it's so much thicker than usual when you're working on something. So there's a bit of jewelry I'm working on right now, look at that. Yeah, so tapes, different types of tapes. Clear packing tape is a superhero, and the better quality that you can get, the better. Thicker wall, like Scotch tape, and that's really good. You pay for it, but it's really, really good because it has a superpower. Resin does not stick to it. So you can coat things in packing tape where resin's going to touch it that you don't want the resin to adhere to, and it won't stick to it. It's also good for making impromptu pour molds that you need to pour resin into. So if you're doing resin filling on handle scales and things, create a little wall around the outside of the wooden scale with packing tape, and the resin won't pass it and it won't stick to it. Very, very handy. You use the resin a lot in jewelry work. I've talked about this so much that I won't go too deep into it, but good needle files and a good range of them are absolutely priceless. These are actually bad needle files, but I have them down here exposed to the elements and everything because they are... sometimes you want to do something that you're hogging away material and you don't necessarily want to use your good files for that. Having the bad disposable files is great. I also have these intermediate files, Barco. They actually make a half decent needle file. These were given to me by my mate Josh Gaunt at GT Edgeworks, and they're great, but they're not as great as furred needle files. These things are phenomenal, and I highly recommend you get a set. Until you have used furred needle files, you don't realize that you're not using files, you're just using file-shaped objects. Furred needle files are the only true needle files. When you need precision, honestly, I've not yet found anything that is as good. That doesn't mean I've tried every brand of file, but so far I am a huge fan. These have changed my game. I always used to use cheap needle files, and I got a tip that not all files cut the same, which seems like a simple thing, but it's not something that actually occurred to me. So just like I have my different grades of vise, I have different grades of needle files for different work. Not something I've seen very often in many knife makers who don't have a jewelry background. I like to do things by hand. I try and avoid using belt finishes on things, especially shaping handles. A lot of people will rely on sort of following just known profiles and things like that. But one thing you learn in jewelry making is to not trust your eyes, and you end up trusting your fingertips. Your fingertips are, especially the pads of your fingers here, are more sensitive than your eyes. They will find things better than your eyes. So I finish my handles with sandpaper. It takes a long time, you get sore hands doing it, but you can feel the work as you go. And so because of that, and that reliance on sandpaper, I do a bit of sandpaper organization, like here, lower grits at the bottom, higher grits at the top, and it just makes things easy to grab. So there's so many times where some people would go over to a belt, I would go to sandpaper all the time. Everybody loves their 2x72 grinders. Everybody in the knife making community, once again, fancy light. This is Frankie, Niels Vandenberg approved. These are phenomenal and a game changer if you are trying to lift your knife making game. But before I had one of these, I had what jewelers use, which is a 1x30. 1x30s are usually laughed off as being like not a serious grinder by a lot of knife makers, but let me tell you, when it comes to needing to get into that tight space or do a little bit of detail work, nothing beats them. They're stuck on one speed. They're pretty rudimentary to use, but absolutely invaluable tool in the shop. There is not a knife that I've made where I have not used this at some point. Sometimes to shape a little bit of the handle. You can get 1-inch belts for a 2x72. That is very, very true. And if you want to go through and get those, you can even make them by splitting normal 2-inch wide belts. But that would work just as well. But having a 1-inch wide belt system in your shop is handy dandy. It's really, really good. So it makes a big difference to your work, just being able to have the confidence to get into small areas, because working with small pieces is sometimes a real pain. Outside of that, so many different types of pliers in my workshop. Nippers, pliers, different bent pliers, straight pliers. Picks is they're a tool that you use in jewelry making quite a bit, and sometimes they are straight like this, and sometimes they are bent like this. But being able to just get into small dinky places, just to scoop out a little bit of schmutz that's gotten in somewhere, or even to push thicker epoxy down into voids that need to be filled and things like that. Where the ricasso meets the guard, sometimes there might be some spill out, and these can very gently be used to, even by putting foam over the end of it, you can push it in and use it as a cleaning tool. They're just phenomenally cheap and phenomenally handy. It's one of those things you might only use them maybe 2 times a year, but when you have them, you're really glad that you had them. It's one of those things that I cannot stress enough. But outside of that, the physical tools, the reality is that jewelry making, probably the most valuable thing that it has taught me is patience, which I'm not the best for, but I feel like I have a lot more than I would have had I not got my start in jewelry, because the patience doesn't come from looking at the textbook way to do things and then just following the steps. The patience comes from knowing how the end piece needs to feel. Jewelry is something that you wear. It becomes part of your day. If you put on a bracelet or a ring or a necklace that is uncomfortable, you are aware of its presence all the time. All the time. Sometimes it can leave blemishes on your skin. If you're making a tool or a knife, the same rule applies. If you are handling a knife and you're holding the handle and there's that one point that always digs into that one point of your hand, it's going to take away that that feeling that it's a part of you, an extension of your body. And jewelry is exactly the same. You don't want somebody to always be very conscious of the fact that they have a necklace on, because it's dragging at them or won't hang evenly or whatever. You want it to just be put on and forgotten about so that they can wear it with pride and not have to think about it. So using the technique of using fingertips or closing your eyes and feeling work to make sure that there's no burrs or hot spots that might actually irritate the user is super important. And so that patience to find those, because they will be there, and sometimes they'll be there in places that aren't logical but still will affect the end user. It's a sense of feel is only and the patience to actually take that time, make the world go quiet and just feel your work, feel your way, as Sandra D says in Greece. Letting my show tunes nerd come out there. So yeah, that's the best things that I can think of, and it really did get me thinking, because any new skill that we learn ends up being living on the shoulders of past skills that we've learned, and things transfer across readily sometimes. And I was surprised to realize how much of that jewelry background has actually transferred across to knife making. So hopefully this has been illuminating for you and you found it interesting. Jared, thank you very much for the generosity of putting this out there as a video for everybody to enjoy. And everybody else, if you would also like to join my Patreon, I have limited spots available in the master tier just because of the content that you get each month. There's only so many hours in the day for me, and there's only limited spots to get there. So yeah, be aware of that if you are thinking of joining. But yeah, you will also get deep dive videos into techniques or theory or whatever you want, and they keep coming every month. So it's, get on board, jump on, it's fun. I really enjoy my patrons. A lot of them chat to me outside of Patreon as well, and I always have time for them. So yeah, I hope to see you on there. Otherwise, be sure to follow me on Facebook and Instagram, and check out the ForgeCast if you haven't already. And I'll see you on the next video, which is halfway through filming, but I stopped filming that one to film this one. It's on a very different tangential topic, which was requested of me, and you should all find it kind of fun, and you'll realize just how much of a nerd I really am. So look forward to that one, and I'll catch you guys later. Bye.